Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're diving deep into a topic that affects almost all of us: relationships, marriage, and the alarmingly high divorce rates in modern society. We're going to explore a perspective that challenges a lot of common assumptions about dating and finding a life partner. I've spent a good deal of time researching this, and I want to share some frankly shocking findings based on scientific data. I often get asked, how do you prepare for a serious, long-term relationship? How do you find the one, avoid major mistakes, and spot those red flags? And there's this common intuition, isn't there? That you need to play the field, get some experience, sow your wild oats, learn about yourself and others, and only then, armed with all this knowledge, choose a partner for life. It sounds logical, right? How can you choose if you've never really dated? How can you satisfy your wife if you're, to put it bluntly, a virgin? How do you make your husband happy if you have no experience? This everyday logic leads to the conclusion that it's a good idea to see what's out there first. And this belief is incredibly widespread. A poll I conducted showed that even among my somewhat unique audience, 40% believe you should have at least one partner before your future spouse. Broader surveys show that 67% of people today see nothing wrong with premarital sex, and only 27% oppose it. But today, I want to try and drive a wedge into these seemingly unshakable beliefs. My goal is ambitious: to explain and perhaps even prove why casual sex, no-strings-attached relationships, and even the modern concept of romantic relationships, as we understand them, are, by and large, a setup for failure. And I'll be relying on not common sense or religious ethics, but on scientific data, statistics, and hard facts. My personal preferences are irrelevant here. I understand this might not sit well with many, but I'm willing to take that risk to warn you about how things really are. Before we dive in, a quick note on marriage. Many are skeptical of the institution today, and often for good reason. The modern institution of marriage has discredited itself, and laws can be unfair. But people's desires haven't changed. Most still want kids, a family, and happiness with a partner. And most of you listening will, sooner or later, enter a long-term relationship, share a home, have kids, even without officially tying the knot. So when I say marriage, or family, I'm talking about a long-term, committed union, ideally for life. All right, let's get to the data. And it should shock you right off the bat. There's a direct and strong correlation between the number of sexual partners before marriage and the probability of divorce. This is backed by a huge amount of research, old and new, across different countries and populations. And this applies not just to women, but to men as well. The myth that a macho man benefits from a high partner count doesn't hold up. Traditional masculinity, by the way, rarely implied numerous sexual conquests. That's more of a modern distortion, especially amplified by internet culture. A key study came out very recently, in 2023. It really dotted the I's and crossed the T's. People often say, it's not the sex itself, it's confounding factors: religiosity, social status, mental health. For example, a religious person might avoid premarital sex and also be less likely to divorce due to their beliefs. Or someone with bipolar disorder might have many partners and also be more prone to divorce. But this study meticulously controlled for all these variables: religiosity, race, social status, family background, individual traits, mental health, relationships with parents, and guess what? The correlation remains statistically significant and very large. I'll quote the researchers. Premarital sex is a highly significant predictor of divorce in every model. The probability of divorce for those who had premarital sexual partners is more than twice as high as for those who did not. They found no evidence that this link is simply due to religious people being less likely to have premarital sex and less likely to divorce. It seems to be about the number of partners itself. If you're looking for a life partner and considering factors like their family background or relationship with their parents, those are important. But the number of previous sexual partners predicts the likelihood of divorce significantly better. I'm not saying it's the only cause, but it's a descriptive fact that helps in making better decisions. Imagine you live in a small town where 250 people have a promiscuous lifestyle and 250 save themselves for marriage. And the first group divorces 2.5 times more often. You can't just ignore that fact when choosing a spouse. It's a metric that holds true across cultures and countries. Of course, you also need to screen out abusers and people with incompatible personalities, but when it comes to the probability of divorce, of someone ceasing to value their vows of fidelity, this stands out. The graph, based on the study's data, people with no sexual partners before marriage divorced 2.5 times less often. But what about marrying young? Like people who marry at 15, 17 without experience and then just get used to it? Fair point. But if we take a population that marries on average at 25, these are mature adults who understand life. And here we see the same pattern. a linear increase in divorce risk with an increasing number of partners. 0 partners before marriage, the probability of divorce is 1.64 times lower than with 1 to 8 partners and 3 times lower than with 9+ partners. And to underscore the significance of this metric, the number of premarital partners is a stronger predictor of divorce than how long you know someone before marriage. Race, the presence or absence of religiosity, which surprised me. Having common goals, they're important, but partner count is more predictive. Education level, age at marriage, having children from a previous marriage, parental divorce, this will surprise many. Income, even clinical depression in one partner. Infidelity has roughly the same predictive power for divorce as a high number of premarital partners. And to reach the same level of divorce risk as someone with 9+ partners, which triples the risk approximately, you might need a combination of factors. For example, infidelity plus low education, or parental divorce plus having a child before marriage plus no religion. And don't think 9+ partners is rare. The average number of premarital partners in the US is around 11. In Norway, it's 12. In Russia, it's 9. Even looking at median numbers, which are lower because of individuals with very high partner counts skewing the average, in Western countries, it's often 5 or 6 partners. There's data from Russia that suggests that 39% of women have had more than 6 partners before marriage. This isn't some niche phenomenon. It's a serious risk factor in the modern world. A very important point here. This information isn't for judging or shaming others. I've made my own mistakes in this area, caused pain, wasted time. I'm not proud of it. Modern broken culture often pushes us into lifestyles that we even start to consider normal, and then it turns out they're harmful. I want to share this with you before you make those mistakes. I suggest changing yourself, your behavior first and foremost. Influence those close to you, but don't use this information to multiply hatred or contempt. Look inward. We all have our own planks in our eye. But let's get back to the data. It's not just the number of partners that matters, but also how you start the relationship. Couples who began with sex without commitment or casual relationships and later married divorce significantly more often than those who aimed for something serious from the start. Sex, especially orgasm, releases oxytocin, creating a powerful bond. You can become attached to someone you wouldn't have rationally chosen if sex hadn't been involved. And there's always the risk of pregnancy, even with contraception. A 0.1% failure rate isn't 0. My personal rule became, don't get into a relationship unless I can see that person as potential family. What about living together before marriage? Common wisdom says it's a good test. The data says otherwise. Cohabitation before marriage correlates with a higher divorce risk. Why? Shared property makes splitting up harder. People might overlook red flags. Also, moving in together can be a revitalizing effect for a dying relationship, merely postponing the inevitable and making things worse. The best advice, ironically, is what your grandmother might have told you. Before sex, before moving in, talk. Get to know the person, their values, reactions, character. Are they manipulative, impulsive? Do your views on life, on marriage, align? If not, move on. Sex is such a high degree of intimacy, it can overshadow everything else. If you build a union around physical intimacy, you miss the person. Then, years later, the passion fades and you realize you don't even like them. Real, long-term intimacy and yes, good sex in a marriage result from a deep connection and love for the person. And it's not just about divorce rates, but the overall quality of the relationship. A higher number of premarital partners correlates with lower subjective relationship stability. You feel less stable, lower sexual satisfaction. This seems counterintuitive, but imagine you've had experiences with 10 different partners, blondes, brunettes, different temperaments, skills. Years into a marriage with one person, won't that nostalgia for that variety creep in? Absolutely. And reduced emotional connection. When you have others to compare to, it's easier to find faults in your current partner and harder to establish a deep bond. To put it in perspective, the decrease in marital satisfaction associated with just one premarital partner, compared to none, has an impact on happiness equivalent to a 50 to 100% increase in annual family income. People work their whole lives for that kind of financial boost, and here a behavioral choice has a similar effect. And to the men who think women want experienced guys, yes, for short-time flings. But for long-term commitment for family, women, like men, generally prefer partners with fewer previous sexual partners. Even people with high sociosexuality, those who enjoy casual encounters, intuitively understand at some point that too many partners isn't healthy and doesn't bode well for a marriage. This isn't something radically new. In 1910, over 50% of men and 70% of women in the US entered marriage as virgins. Divorce rates were extremely low. Of course, culture played a role, but modern data points to a direct link. And there's even a genetic component. Certain genes are linked to increased sociosexuality and divorce risk. This can run in families. If you don't consider this behaviorally, you're taking on more risk. In modern culture, which practically shoves images of escorts and sexualized content down our throats, it's crucial to remember, no one will help you but yourself. The main tool is your own behavior. Can you, for example, abstain from sex for a year while getting to know your future spouse? This could be a decisive question. But there's an even more critical aspect: children. Sexual relationships can lead to children who are completely dependent on us for 18 years. And frankly, we treat children criminally today. A kindergarten teacher can face criminal charges for harming a child. Why don't we apply similar standards to parents? The departure of a parent from the family, most often through divorce, is proven to cause incredible harm to children.
The departure of a parent from the family, most often through divorce, is proven to cause incredible harm to children. This is a scientific fact. When we talk about divorce, we're talking about the health of the next generation. Look at the statistics. Women with no sexual partners before marriage have only a 7% chance of becoming single mothers. With just one prior partner, that figure jumps to 30%. We have an epidemic of fatherlessness. The absence of a father leads to worse academic performance. Children with biological fathers do better than those with stepfathers, especially girls. Twice the school expulsion rate. Lower empathy, poor aggression control. Rough and tumble play with a father, surprisingly, teaches this. 90% of homeless individuals and 80% of children hospitalized for psychiatric issues grew up without fathers. Shorter telomeres in children, a marker for lifespan. Every 1% increase in fatherless families in an area increases teen violence by 3%. Fatherlessness impacts crime rates as much as poverty. Children from poor but intact families are 80% more likely to reach the middle class. Children from middle-class fatherless homes are 400% more likely to become poor. Divorce almost always means the child stays with the mother. Mothers often have to work more, child support is often insufficient. The child ends up in daycare earlier and for longer. And while good daycares exist, average institutional care can't replace a mother's care. This can lead to outcomes similar to those seen in orphans: hyperactivity, anxiety. We are shaping the society we live in with our own hands. Divorce is very bad, and a crucial factor in it is the number of sexual partners. You simply can't escape this truth. And to conclude, a truly radical thought you might not have expected. The quality and intensity of sex life are significantly higher in long-term, serious family relationships. Numerous studies show this. For quality sex life, intimacy is key, my friends. We want to feel like we're having sex with a real person with whom we share a deep context, something more than just a shot of alcohol after a nightclub. This might seem counterintuitive, but it's in the family where there's emotional intimacy that sex is better. This intimacy radically predicts orgasm frequency. Especially for women participating in modern hookup culture, it's important to understand you're not making your sex life brighter or better in the long run. Yes, you can get experience, temporary pleasure, but it's like sugar, enjoyable to eat, but not something to base your diet on. Similarly, we shouldn't act at a cultural level with promiscuous sexual relations. It's harmful to you and to society. Moreover, delaying sex within a relationship makes it more enjoyable. And even more radically, religious couples, on average, are more satisfied with their sexual experiences. Why? Likely because of the spiritual intimacy, the perception of their union as something more than just an economic or instrumental bond. So much of what we think we know about sex and relationships is simply wrong. We often make mistakes, and these mistakes need to be corrected. I too was once cavalier about these issues, but I believe it's time for serious, substantial changes in our society. Today, I've only touched on a fraction of a vast amount of information, haven't mentioned hundreds of studies. If you want to dive deeper, look for more information, for example, on my Telegram channel. Join our community dedicated to personal effectiveness, where we discuss everything that can improve your life. A lot to think about. The main message is clear. Our choices about sexual partners before entering long-term relationships seem to have profound and often unexpected consequences. Thanks for being with me today. Wishing you all the best.